On Dispatches tonight, a question of war crimes. Do some prominent British Muslims have a criminal past? In tonight's Dispatch, the results of a major 9-month investigation that leads from London and Birmingham back to the country where they were born and to the memory of a brutal and bloody war. Tonight's Dispatch presents evidence of crimes committed not in Bosnia or Rwanda, but in Bangladesh. Crimes that can be prosecuted under British law. In this specially extended edition, the story of the Imam in Birmingham, the community leader in East London, and one of those who led the campaign against Salman Rushdie. The questions they must answer in the War Crimes File.
Dhaka, the capital city of Bangladesh. In December 1971, in the final days of the independence war against Pakistan, the city was gripped by terror. In a series of Gestapo-style raids, intellectuals were rounded up by paramilitary death squads. One victim was Dr. Muhammad Murtaza, an eminent physician. He was tied up, blindfolded, and dragged away.
When he heard his daughter's cries, my husband looked towards us with his blindfolded eyes and raised his hands to say goodbye and got into the bus.
Another stop was at the home of magazine editor Selina Parveen. She was torn from the arms of her 8-year-old son. Sirajuddin Hussain, a respected journalist, was also taken. His wife tried to protest.
I came at them screaming. Then one of them yelled, "Shut up, shut up. If you cry, we will shoot you."
Eventually, the bus arrived at Dolly Chowdhury's house, where her brother-in-law, a professor at Dhaka University, was in hiding.
My servant opened the door. Immediately, they all rushed into the room. We were all screaming and crying out loud. Then they forcibly dragged him off.
Professor Chowdhury was never seen again. Two days later, hundreds of bodies were found dumped in a mass grave here on the outskirts of Dhaka. Among them were Dr. Murtaza and Selina Parveen. She had been horribly mutilated. Many of the corpses had been blindfolded, with their hands tied behind their backs. A young journalist expressed his outrage to the world's media.
No constitutional movement, violence.
"24 years later, that same journalist, Inayatullah Khan, revisits the site of the mass graves. He recalls searching for the bodies of his colleagues and friends.
It was a pogrom. It was a pogrom. I mean, it can only be likened to a Nazi-like pogrom. The bodies are mostly very mutilated. In some cases, they're even, the bodies are decapitated bodies, or limbs cut, or decapitated bodies. It's very difficult. It's too terrible to describe it. Very difficult.
Many of these killings were carried out not by the retreating Pakistani soldiers, but by Islamic fundamentalists who collaborated with them.
These were people who were Bengalis, who by absolutely perverted notions of religion sought to justify the worst kind of cruelty, genocide, rape, and the kind of atrocities which we were absolutely horrified to discover had taken place.
It was essentially a political killing done by the fundamentalist party, who not only believed in Pakistan, but also not only collaborated with the Pakistan army in the genocide, but had their own scheme of killing.
Some of those responsible for the killing have lived in Britain for around 20 years and are prominent members of the Bangladeshi community. This man is involved in a network of Islamic groups. He's the vice chairman of the East London Mosque and a trustee of Muslim Aid. This man is the head teacher of a Muslim school and a co-opted member of Tower Hamlets Education Committee. And this man is the imam of a mosque in Birmingham and on the national executive of an Islamic fundamentalist organization. In a 9-month investigation, Dispatches has uncovered evidence that all 3 men were involved in war crimes in Bangladesh. Under the Geneva Conventions, enacted by Parliament, they can be prosecuted in British courts, even though their crimes were committed abroad.
I think the message has to go out that if people commit war crimes, there's nowhere in the world where they can run. There isn't going to be a sanctuary, and they can be prosecuted wherever they are found.
The seeds of the Bangladesh War were sown back in 1947 with the end of the British Raj. As part of the independence deal, Lord Mountbatten presided over the partition of India. Millions of refugees, both Hindus and Muslims, fled their homes. The Muslims flocked to a new nation, Pakistan, which was split in 2, West Pakistan and East Pakistan. The division didn't work. Throughout the 1960s, a nationalist movement, the Awami League, gained popular support in the East. In 1970, under the charismatic leadership of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the Awami League won an overall majority in Parliament. But the military rulers refused to give up power.
None of us had envisaged the kind of brutality, the kind of genocidal onslaught that was unleashed on the night of the 25th of March, the 26th of March.
On that night, the Pakistan Army moved into Dhaka. Roadblocks were set up, government buildings were secured, and a curfew was imposed. Here in Old Dhaka, Pakistani troops went on the rampage, murdering indiscriminately.
This picture is my father, this my little brother. He was stabbed once with a bayonet. Just one bayonet stab, nothing else. One bullet in my father's chest.
It was at the University of Dhaka that some of the worst atrocities were committed. At the time, Meghna Guhotakota was 13 years old. Her father, a professor of English, was murdered by Pakistani troops.
This is where the bodies are right now. About 300 people were killed over 2 days of dreadful killing. And the bodies lie here right now.
This rare piece of film was secretly shot during the massacre. In the bottom right-hand corner, a group of Hindu students is herded towards a pile of corpses by Pakistani soldiers. One of the students begs for his life. The soldiers appear to leave. Then one comes back. After the military crackdown, volunteers from all over the country formed a liberation army known as the Mukti Bahini. Trained and armed in part by the Indian government, it began an effective guerrilla campaign.